can I get feedback on my audibility?
Yes, JP, it is better now. JP is better.
Okay, great. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So, again, I have the honor of introducing the next speaker. He is the immediate past chief executive of the Mental Health Authority. So we are in no small company today. As at the first time I met him, he was then the director of Akwasi Psychiatric Hospital, and he's a leading force in mental health in Ghana, a driving force behind the Mental Health Act, and this law that has been amended. You can't count, you really can't count many people who have done as much as he has done for mental health in Ghana, mental health law and policy in Ghana. He's a fellow of the West Africa College of Physicians, also a fellow of the Ghana College of Physicians and Surgeons, and an associate professor in psychiatry. Without further ado, I give you Professor Akwasi OSEI. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. And I guess my video is being seen and my voice is heard loud and clear. Any feedback?
Loud and clear, Prof.
Loud and clear.
Wonderful.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. So I also thank you very much for this webinar and for inviting me to be part of it. When I heard of the decriminalization of suicide, I was really elated, and I've granted a lot of interviews to the media. My elation stems from the fact, and it's been well confirmed by Dr. Fiagbe's delivery, that suicide is not just somebody deciding, wishing just to die, wishing to take his life, and simply dying. There are a whole lot of issues about that. And the sum total of it is that most of them, 93 to 95%, have mental health issues. And the underlying cause of the mental health issue has just been elucidated to us all. So clearly, we just can't dismiss the fact that suicide has a biological basis, has a mental health issue, and we need to attempt to prevent people from taking their lives. And if they do not succeed in taking their lives, we don't put them in jail, but we regard them as having issues, as crying for help, as requiring support, and therefore we give the support to them. By the way, just to say, I'm not giving slides presentation. So that actually explains the base of my elation. Now, when you talk about suicide, obviously we are talking about somebody taking his life deliberately. So an act of deliberately taking one's life, that is suicide. And if he does not succeed, or if he does not complete, then we say attempted suicide. Other terms that may be used are para-suicide, but it still comes to the fact that the person attempted. And as part of the behavior associated with suicide, there are various issues. Suicidal ideation, when the thought just occurs to somebody, just once. Why don't I kill myself? That's suicidal ideation. But if the thought keeps occurring, then suicidal thoughts. And if this leads a person to decide that, oh, should I kill myself? Should I not? Why should I? Why should I not? That is suicidal contemplation. And if he moves on further to decide that now I'm firmly decided that I want to take my life, so I'm planning how to do it, whether to go for a knife or whatever. So that is suicide plan or suicidal planning. And if he moves on further from the planning to attempting it, to try it, that is suicidal attempt. And thank God if he does not succeed or if he does not complete it, then it's simply suicidal attempt. But if he does complete it, then that becomes suicide. So with all understand is for this session of mine, we just want to understand what is the situation like in our part of the world. Dr. Fiagbe gave some of the features worldwide. I'll reinforce it and then just give what the situation is like for us. So worldwide, we know that 700 to 800,000 deaths occur by suicide a year, which is about twice the number of deaths occurring through homicide, somebody killing another person. So we kill ourselves more than others kill us, twice as many times. And that is something we need to recognize that. And then that also translates to about 1 death every 40 seconds. So every 40 seconds, somebody takes his life, and that is something significant. We also need to recognize that, so the whole thing comes about 1.3% global deaths in 2019 from suicide. Of all the deaths that occurred, 1.3% of it globally was from suicide. And that is something really, really very serious. Typically, more males die through suicide than females, even though we also recognize that more females attempt suicide than males. Indeed, about 2 to 3 times more males die through suicide, whereas than females, whereas about 4 times females attempt suicide than more than men. And the reasons are obvious why in spite of the fact that many people attempting, many females attempting, fewer die. Females tend to use less lethal methods that are not likely to kill somebody, like taking drug overdose, as compared with firearms shooting. So the methods women tend to use are less lethal than the methods that males tend to use. And apparently, women also, as you say, suicide is a cry for help, or attempted suicide is a cry for help. Women tend to be more in need, therefore wanting to take their lives, than men. So where the man contemplates is well thought out, well planned, and then he executes it. So these are reasons. A man may die through lethal means, like jumping over a tall building, or in front of a moving vehicle, or by hanging, or by drowning. Yeah, these are all lethal methods that one is not likely to fail when he uses these methods. And by the way, when I was talking about the suicide terminologies, let's also try to avoid the language that one has committed suicide, because committed suicide, the word commit, you commit what is wrong, what is a crime. So if you say committed suicide, we are already criminalizing the conduct. Now that the parliament has been gracious enough to decriminalize it, we should also change the language from committed suicide to simply take his life through suicide or die by suicide. That is obviously a neater approach. Now, we started by giving the epidemiology status worldwide. And let's also see what exactly it entails. Indeed, worldwide, people take their lives through more of firearms. Locally, it's not so much firearms. Firearms worldwide, and then pesticides, taking chemicals that will kill them. And whereas, or hanging or throwing themselves down, indeed, so there is, in fact, there's a bridge called Suicide Bridge, because people stand there and throw themselves into the river. Our environment here, people don't often die through suicide or by suicide through these methods. And that's an interesting phenomenon that we also need to recognize. People here die more from hanging, and that is with respect more to the males, and then from pesticides and chemicals, kerosene, bleach, and rat poison, and such approaches. Indeed, through the pesticides, that accounted for why, for some time, DDT was banned, at least in Ghana and in many parts of the world, because DDT was a common chemical that people used to take their lives. But somehow, because we thought, or people thought that the incidence of suicide through DDT had gone down, it's been unbanned, and I think that is quite unfortunate. We also need to recognize that for every completed suicide, as Dr. Fiagbe said, only 4 are reported. But even for those who, whether reported or not reported, for every case of completed suicide, about 10 would have attempted without completing. Now, for every attempted suicide, 10 would have planned without attempting, without having the courage to attempt. And for every planned suicide, 10 would have contemplated without having the courage to even plan. And so it tells us that for every incidence of suicide, we have about 1,000 people somewhere lurching around who have thought of it, who have contemplated, or who have planned and did not go further. And this is why we need to recognize, especially with the media and the language, so that if you want to prevent, it might be difficult to totally eliminate, but if you want to reduce the incidence of suicide, then you also want to avoid language and such approaches that might push people into suicide. For instance, we know what we call copycat suicide, copycat syndrome. When somebody attempts suicide or dies through suicide, and the media graphically paints the picture of how this person went through even 10,000 are there who have contemplated or thought about it, planned or attempted. And they may not have had the courage. They may not know exactly how to go about it. But one of these 1,000 people then decides that, oh, so that's a wonderful approach. So let me try that. And indeed, about 3 or 4 years ago, a young lady of about 11 years took her life and wrote a note that I saw another person having taken her life, and I thought that I would try that and see what would happen, just out of curiosity. Young girl, 11 years. So wrote a note and tried it. And the person saw it on the television. So the grandmother actually came out lamenting and accusing the media that you people have killed my granddaughter. That is a typical case of copycat syndrome. So we need to avoid that. The language we use is very important so that we don't give the impression that we are encouraging or we are giving people the leeway to plan it. Now, locally, the sizes we give generally are the worldwide phenomenon. Now, locally, an NGO about 6 or 7 years ago did a study and found that 1,500 people take their lives every year. 1,500 people die through suicide every year. And that comes to roughly about 1 in 5, 1 in 5 days, 4 or 5 days every year. That's quite a lot. But as huge as it is, a suicide atlas, World Global Suicide Atlas, also puts Ghana in the bracket of 15.8 deaths per 100,000, which is one of the highest. Well, not exactly the highest, but it's still quite high. 15.8 deaths per 100,000. And that also comes about 4,898 deaths in a year, more than the 1,500 that the NGO got. Now, that is significant. That is significant. We need to recognize that this is an issue that we need to see how best we can prevent it. Generally, Ghana, compared with other areas, an area like South Korea, deaths per 100,000, much higher. But we cannot compare ourselves with those countries. We need to see how we can reduce ours. And that's very important. Indeed, Ghana Health Service in 2022 has got the first quarter suicidal attempts as 470 suicidal attempts per the first quarter. But let's understand that this is grossly underreported. There are many suicidal attempts that will not get to the hospital, especially if they don't use any attempt that will lead to a health hazard, immediate health hazard. If the person takes a rat poison and becomes unconscious, he is likely to be rushed to the hospital. So it will go into their data. But if he uses a method that probably knocks him down a short while and he gets up, the people may not take him to the hospital, and so it may not go into the records. That is one. The other thing is that our records so far don't even include suicide or attempted suicide as a cause of death. Remotely, yes, remotely you may have it as a cause of death. But in terms of the pathology and counting the mortality, we may miss it. So we tend to miss suicidal attempts and suicides in our records. So the 427, what I'm saying is that the 470 that Ghana Health Service got should be regarded as gross under-reportage and not the figures that we may need to look at. Because otherwise we deceive ourselves and think that, well, there isn't much of a big deal. We also need to recognize that the pattern of suicide that we see in the country has changed. In the past, if you have somebody had taken his life, then the person was in his 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Indeed, globally, above 60 is the highest rate where people take their lives. And under 14, the minimum. 20, 39, quite low. What we are seeing now is that there is a certain reversal of the pattern. Instead of somebody being 50, 60, 70, when the person takes his life, and that one was largely because the person looked back towards the end of his or her life, looked back in disappointment and said, oh, I think I'm a failure. I should have done this, I should have done that. And then that person goes into depression and eventually takes his life. But the pattern is changing quite significantly these days. And the change is that, for instance, we are seeing more of 20 to 35 people taking their lives. 20 to 35 people, and these are students or fresh graduates. And among the reasons why they take their lives are interesting: job or graduate unemployment. The person has completed schooling, 4 or 5 years, no employment, and decides that I can no longer depend on my parents, and decides to take his life. Somebody, a student, decides that my school results, my performance is quite poor, and I'm a disappointment to my parents. I can't continue to humiliate myself and humiliate my parents. So decides to take his life. Somebody, a student, game betting, and these are all real cases we are seeing, game betting. I'm a student, I've used all my money, in fact, my school fees, to enter game betting with the hope that I win and then I can pay back, and then I don't. Game betting, leading to addiction, a betting addiction. And that is also leading to a lot of deaths among students. Rarely would you see people, well, not really. I mean, it does not happen often that above 35, then they want to take their lives. Indeed, I myself, my phone is online for suicide help. And in some 8 months period that I decided to take count of the suicides, the attempted suicides, or the call for help that I was getting, within 8 months, I had 150 calls. Now remember, these are people who go to the net for help, and then they find it. So the 150 were largely between 20 and 35. Some are as young as 11 years, some are as old as 53, but largely between 20 and 35. And these are students, these are the computer literate people, so they can go to the net and find whatever answer they want to get. So we should not take this number to be a complete picture, because there are others who will not go to the net to seek help, and therefore they will not get to this. But of the 800 within, of the 150 within the last eight months, that is significant, because as I said, that is a particular group of people who can have access to the net and they can go for help. And a lot of them were students, a few graduates who are not getting employment, a few still married people who, out of frustration in their marriage, they want to take their lives. A few were also relationship problems. My boyfriend, my girlfriend has divorced me or has jilted me, and I feel frustrated. My world has come to an end. These are real issues. Amongst the very young ones, the under 20s, a girl decides that my parents don't want me to move with a boy, and so I want to take my life. I am too chubby, too plumpy, and my mates are laughing at me that I'm obese, and out of that, I want to take my life. And these are real issues. Somebody thinks he's too thin, and again, he's a target of friends, and so he wants to take his life. There's another significant thing, cyberbullying. Cyberbullying. Social media these days is a helper killer. It does help because it does enable us to get news and instant news. So it does help in a lot of ways. But the flip side is that it becomes a means for people to bully others. So people taunt and haunt others. And Ghana in particular, our social media is used to insult people, especially celebrities, politicians, people who are popularly known. Then they are taunted, they are insulted. Somebody makes a statement, others don't agree, and that he becomes a target of bullying, cyberbullying. And if somebody cannot withstand that, then he decides that, then let me take my life. And there are quite a few cases of celebrities confessing that they've gone to a point where, out of the bullies, out of the insults, they really wanted to take their lives. And this is something we need to recognize, because it becomes an issue as cyberbullying as one of the issues precipitating wanting to take one's life. Then I talked about the pattern in terms of age, which is now changed. There's another pattern in terms of gender distribution. I said earlier that globally, more males take their lives than females, in the proportion of about 2 to 3 times males to females, but more females, about 4 times as many, well attempted than males. But there's a certain reversal in terms of the completed suicides here. What we are seeing is a balance, male to male, it's about 1 to 1. And that is significant. So why are more women taking their lives, completing the suicide attempt, completing the suicide than in the past? And that is something we need to investigate. But in terms of the proportion that attempted, is still about 4 to 1. More females attempted than males. But the fact that they completed is something that we need to recognize and need to find out. But of course, we know that among the reasons why people take their lives, indeed, as I mentioned earlier, 93 to 95% of people take their lives through mental health issues. Either there was a pre-existing mental health problem, or at the point of attempting, or at the point of the suicide, there was an acute stress reaction, which is still a mental health issue, but there was no pre-existing mental health problem. And this tends to make people think that a good number of people take their lives when they didn't have mental issues. Correct, they didn't have a pre-existing mental issue, but at the point of taking their lives, there was an acute stress reaction. And things that could have pushed them into acute stress reaction. Somebody is a trader and encounters a loss. The capital is lost overnight and decides that, no, I can't stand this. Where am I going to get capital to replenish, where am I going to get funds to capitalize my trade? Then he goes through acute stress reaction. He decides that the way out for me is to take my life. This is not a pre-existing mental health problem, but a mental health issue arising acutely out of the phenomenon the person went into. Somebody has run into a debt, let's say a government worker, and then suddenly finds himself as having run into a debt, and then auditors are after him. Within a day or two, the person decides to take his life. This is not a pre-existing mental health issue, but at the point of his taking his life, it was an acute stress reaction. That is still a mental health issue. So these are many others. So they all constitute about 93 to 95% mental health issues, and about 80 to 85% of them are depression. And various factors that could push people into depression, economic crisis, socioeconomic crisis, economic downturn that we are experiencing, job loss, object loss, the person has lost a dear one through death, or a dear one has deserted, has left this person. All this push people into depression and eventually mental health, attempted suicide. And these are things we need to recognize. The other thing I also want to mention, I talked about a pattern that is changing, the pattern in terms of age, in terms of the gender, and in terms of the method also is very significant. In the past, as I said, for males, it was more by hanging or by firearms. For females, more by chemicals, pesticides. Now that DDT was banned, the pattern has changed because we're beginning to see deaths by suicide from DDT very, very low, or chemicals generally very, very low. But now drug overdose becomes a reason for people attempting to take their lives. So sleeping tablets, somebody takes a whole handful of it and swallows. If it's not lucky enough to be rescued in good time, such a person could die. So drug overdose from some of these chemicals, somebody may even simply just paracetamol. This may eventually not kill you, but it's a para-suicide, attempted suicide. So we recognize that. Now, the other thing I also want to mention is that the time of suicide or suicidal attempt, we see a lot of it in the night from 11, at least from the 150 people calls that I was getting, between 11 a.m. and 11 p.m., and 2 a.m. Apparently, that was the time that on their own, they decide that what is life got for me. So they have the opportunity to contemplate. In the daytime, it's going to work, no time to think about this. By the nighttime, 11 to 2 a.m., that is when, up to 3 a.m., that is when they think a lot about this. So the time pattern is also significant. In fact, of the 150, just about 2 or 3, well, about 5 of them actually called in the daytime, but most of them in the nighttime. Sometimes as many as 5 calls per night. And these are really something significant. We need to recognize that. So on the whole, I want to say that yes, people take their lives or attempt to take their lives for various reasons. The pattern as we knew it in the past is changing, and we need to appreciate it. More is now counterbalanced, more equal males and females taking their lives as against more males in the past than females, but still more females attempting than males. The pattern is changing in terms of age. In the past, you heard of somebody attempting suicide or taking his life, then he was 50, 60, 70. Now, younger age group, 20 to 35, and that is something very significant. A few will go to 40, 53, but most of them in the students and just completed schooling bracket. The reasons why people are taking their lives are also changing. We are now getting more job unemployment, school dropout, cyberbullying. These are reasons, as against in the past when cyberbullying, of course, wouldn't be an issue because internet was not available. So the change and the pattern is something we need to recognize. And we need to factor that one in our attempt at reducing suicidal attempts, in our attempts at prevention, which I'm sure that OSEI will talk more about that. But we need to recognize this change in pattern. If you do that, you will be doing ourselves a lot of good. But the last point I want to say is that when the issue of the decriminalization came up, the social media was awash, ridiculing us that, oh, now you are talking about freedom to die, freedom to die. So if anybody wants to die, he can go ahead and die. We are not saying that. It's not freedom to die. And that's why I like the theme, overall theme of the program, decriminalization. Is it a freedom to die or freedom to live? It is freedom to live, for people to recognize that if you feel like dying, there is an issue. So let's address it. And once you address it, and you are happy. Because frankly, for all those who attempt to take their lives, if you save them, almost invariably, they are all grateful that they didn't die or we were not allowed to die, except that still a good number becomes a reason. In fact, prior suicide attempts becomes a good reason for another person to attempt. So yes, somebody attempts, we are able to save him, he's happy, but then that also becomes a reason for him to want to attempt it. So let's know these factors and let's recognize the change in pattern. And that is where I end my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, Prof, thank you very much, Dr.
Prof.
JP. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that enlightening presentation. I'm very sure that we learned a lot, and a few of the highlights that struck me with that suicide is not a white man's problem. It's not an Asian problem. It's a global problem, and it's rife in Ghana as well. And it's something that we definitely need to address, and that's what all the work that has been going on behind the scenes has been to do. And suicide risk, varies depending on the stage in which a person is. The person may be nursing the idea but have no plan. They may have a plan, or they may just have the intent to do it, or they may actually act on it. And then, if thankfully they survive, these people are at even greater risk than the average person to attempt again, regardless of whether they are punished or not. And that's why it's important to address this. And the media and people in general have to be mindful of the way we report and talk about suicide. Now it's been decriminalized, so we don't say commit anymore, because you only commit crimes or sins. And how you present it is very important. It's important when, to the media people who might be here, when you talk about suicide, when you report on suicide, you don't glorify it